Miss Weingarten, are you a medical doctor?
I am not.
Are you a mother?
I am a mother by marriage.
By marriage, I see.
And my wife is here with me, so I'm really glad that she's here, Rabbi Sharon Kleinfeld.
Miss Weingarten, and you haven't taught school since the 90s, so you're not a teacher anymore.
I am actually, Representative, I'm actually on leave from my teaching position, and this fall I will be teaching as a guest teacher at Cornell, my alma mater.
When was the last year you taught? 1997, is that correct?
The last time I taught a full class was June 1997.
Okay, that's been quite a long time, approximately 26 years ago. Do you believe in the First Amendment, Ms. Weingarten?
I believe in the Constitution, including the First Amendment, of course.
Oh, great. Well, I'd like to remind you of one of your tweets here where you agreed that my suspension on Twitter, in your own words, politicians shouldn't be exempt from standards about spreading misinformation. Greene has repeatedly shown reckless disregard for those standards. This suspension is justified. This is your tweet. Just last year, January 2nd, 2022, I was suspended for my statements about COVID-19 as a member of Congress, by the way. And also, I'd like to point out by the emojis, by your name here, it looks like you're more of a political activist than anything. Clearly, unfortunately, you think Ukraine comes before the United States. I'm not sure what the black flex is. I mean, is that digital blackface? But congratulations on graduating from school. But I'd like to
No, it is about honoring black
Ms. Weingarten, I reclaim my time. I didn't ask you a question.
Sorry.
What I'd like to talk about is your recommendations to the CDC as not a medical doctor, not a biological mother, and really not a teacher either. So what you did is you advised the CDC.
Mr. Chairman, that's a
excuse me, this is my time. You advised the CDC to have schools provide remote work, options for staff that have documented high-risk conditions who are increased risk for severe illness from COVID-19 to limit the risk of workplace exposure, telework, virtual teaching opportunities, modified job responsibilities, environmental modifications, scheduling flexibility, temporary reassignments to different job responsibilities. None of your advice had to do with to stop the spread of COVID-19. It was all about teachers staying home. And there was big results of that. Let me tell you, I am a mother, and all three of my children were directly affected by the school closures, by your recommendations, which is something that you really can't understand. I'd like to point out, let's talk about the real effects of this. Obviously, we know the test results. Oh, and by the way, you celebrating what I had said on Twitter, I had said that children should be in school. I had said the truth, that children were not dying at high rates of COVID-19 like older people were. I had also advocated for our children, not for teachers getting to stay home and kids being forced into virtual schooling. I advocated for the safety of our children and for their education. But you, as a political activist, for the president of the teachers union, we're not advocating for anything good for our kids, and our kids have suffered greatly. As a matter of fact, suicides increased. Their rates of learning went down. And you know what else happened to them? Anxiety, depression, all kinds of problems happened to kids. And then ironically, here's something that was shocking to me, and I'll bring this up to you. You know what else happened? While kids were forced to stay home, and you approve of this, the diagnosis of youths with gender dysphoria surged. This is literally 2020, but yet this is 2021. And this is a problem. This is a major problem. And the direct effect of school closures can be seen here. These are diagnoses of gender dysphoria. And you can see it sharply increased after 20 and 21. It went up. The rates went up. So kids were forced to stay home into so-called virtual learning, where they were spending a lot of time on social media, and all of a sudden we see a direct result of this. And this is a major problem. But the other problem is is you had no business advising the CDC what the medical guidelines were for school closures, because now we have a nation of school children who have suffered because of it. The problem is people like you need to admit that you're just a political activist, not a teacher, not a mother, and not a medical doctor.
In case you didn't know what soullessness looks like, that's Marjorie Taylor Greene reminding you that the party of family values sure does have a lot of people who know how to stand out as human trash cans. Now, obviously, the principal issue here is Greene suggesting that non-biological parents aren't actually parents. That's right, coming to you straight from the party that says there shouldn't be abortions because people could just adopt and be parents to those kids, and then when they do adopt, Republicans will apparently criticize you for thinking that you're a real parent. And not only that, what's the constituency for this stance by Marjorie Taylor Greene? Half of marriages in this country have ended in divorce, which means that likely 1 out of every 2 people watching this have step-parents, not to mention adoptive parents or legal guardians. Greene is basically saying that all of your families aren't valid enough in her eyes because they don't satisfy some arbitrary bar that she's erected for herself. It's like Republicans wake up every day asking how they can push away more people. And just more broadly, I'm sorry, but I am so fucking tired of Republicans telling people how they should or shouldn't live, or that their lives aren't valid if they don't comport with whatever narrow-minded worldview is espoused by some dwindling faction of far-right extremists in the Republican Party. That you can't have non-biological parents, that you can't get reproductive care, that you can't get family planning, that you can't go to the doctor's office, that you can't travel interstate, you can't identify how you want to identify, all underscored by the fact that the party seeking to control your life is the same party that brands itself the party of small government. I gotta say, there is nothing quite as big as Republican small government. Now, during her unhinged tirade here, she tries to catch the witness in some type of a gotcha moment by asking if she believes in the First Amendment, which she of course does, and then pulls up a tweet from the witness writing in support of Marjorie Taylor Greene's suspension from Twitter, as if to say, well, you say you believe in the First Amendment, and yet here you are supporting the opposite. So I'm gonna speak slowly here, just on the off chance that Marjorie Taylor Greene herself is watching, and I wanna make sure she understands. Getting suspended from a private company's social media platform for violating its terms of service is not a violation of the First Amendment. The First Amendment is there to allow for free speech without government interference. Twitter.com is not the government, meaning no, there was no First Amendment violation. And also, that Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about. Now, as far as the COVID stuff goes, I don't think it's worth delving into because I've probably made this argument 5,000 times, and if you don't understand the reality surrounding COVID by now, you're probably not going to get it by 5001. But I will respond to this one thing that Greene says here.
You advise the CDC to have schools provide remote work, options for staff that have documented high-risk conditions who are increased risk for severe illness from COVID-19 to limit the risk of workplace exposure, telework, virtual teaching opportunities, modified job responsibilities, environmental modifications, scheduling flexibility, temporary reassignments to different job responsibilities. None of your advice had to do with to stop the spread of COVID-19. It was all about teachers staying home.
She says, none of your advice had to do with stopping the spread of COVID. It was all about teachers staying home. Yeah, that's the point. The way to stop the spread of COVID was expressly to prevent human-to-human contact. So when teachers and students were advised on how to proceed with schooling remotely, the literal only reason that they did that was to stop the spread of COVID. I mean, my God, I try not to levy personal attacks in these videos, but Marjorie Taylor Greene is so stupid it actually hurts. And Greene goes on to point out the tertiary effects of suspending in-person learning. And she's right in this case, there were adverse impacts from remote learning. But schools had the impossible task of reconciling putting teachers' and kids' lives in danger amid enormous COVID outbreaks with doing remote learning, which frankly was subpar. And there's no easy answer, and honestly, regardless of which decision was chosen by the school districts, people would have suffered. But the one thing that was clear is that getting rid of COVID was the top priority and would make it so that schools wouldn't have to make that impossible decision. And yet it was people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of the GOP who spent their time in office downplaying COVID and pretending that it wasn't real, thereby ensuring that we wouldn't be able to contain it. And if you don't believe me, ask yourself whether there was a link between us being the only developed country on the planet where the ruling political party decided to pretend COVID was no big deal, and the fact that that same country, with only 5% of the world's population, had 20% of the world's COVID deaths. Actions have consequences, and so do the GOP's incompetence here. So just taking a step back, I know it sucks to have to hear about someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene on a daily basis, but just remember, Republicans have elevated her basically to the second most powerful person in the House, just behind Kevin McCarthy. This is who they want to represent their party. She's not some errant lawmaker, she is the future and the present. So I know it's easy to say, she's just some extremist, who cares what she says, I'm tired of hearing about her. The fact is that yes, she's an extremist, but she's mainstream within her conference. So if the extremism is too much, if the abortion bans are too much, the book bans, the insurrection sympathizing, the attacks on democracy, and the outright stupidity, then just know that a vote for Republicans, any Republican, is a vote to embolden the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world. Our job is not to just shut down the extremists, it is to keep the rest of her party out of power, because power for them is power for her. And clearly, this woman doesn't deserve an ounce of it. Before you go, I need your help. I'm right on the cusp of hitting 2 million subscribers, so please help me grow this channel so the progressive media ecosystem grows by hitting the subscribe button right here on the screen. I also started a Spanish channel so we can finally start regaining some of that lost ground among Spanish speakers, so if you want to help support those efforts, you can hit that subscribe button. And finally, if you listen to podcasts and you want to support mine, you'll find a link to that on the screen as well. Thanks so much for watching.